for Nigerians, all we want is a better and improved power supply. Talk to us about the issue of power generation. Where do we stand at the moment?
Yes, I mean, we all desire. Don't forget that even for those of us in the industry, we're consumers as well, and we pay. So that's our desire. Because honestly speaking, if we get power right in this country, it will turn around our economy. But from the very beginning, having a behemoth called PHCN was never the way to go. And what that has led to has been this subsidy game, which, as we are seeing in both power and the petroleum sector, is just, to just put it mildly, a scam. Because what is going on right now is that you do not have numbers for anything. How much power is generated? There's quarrel over whether it's 5,000, whether the capacity is 8, or whether it's 13. But the most important thing is that even if the GenCos can generate 8,000 as it's claimed, they can only transmit less than 5 because of transmission constraints. Transmission, by the way, is still 100% federal government. Even when it now goes through all that and gets to the discos themselves have to battle with antiquated infrastructure, which they have to invest in. That requires a lot of capex. To invest in capex, if that investment is not going to be reflected in the tariffs, there's no incentive for you to do it. Otherwise, you will end up subsidizing the sector. So it's still a value chain that's plagued by liquidity crisis. And the only way you can do that is to ensure that you allow the economics of the sector determine the price. That's the only way investors will come. I have always said that the money that is required to take us out of the power quagmire is not in Nigeria. It is in hundreds of billions of dollars. It must be investable funds coming from outside of these shores that are secure and are assured that the investment climate is friendly. But when you have a subsidy regime that distorts this picture, it's going to be an uphill task. So whether it is the investors, the discos, the Nigerians have invested, some of them are going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of this decision. But I can assure you, anybody who takes over from this point is going to be plagued by the same problem. So until we sit and speak to each other and have the entire value chain speak and discuss, it's going to be very difficult. You thinking for a second how much it takes the average Nigerian to give themselves power. And this time, think about your power consumption holistically. You generate, you buy diesel, you have inverter, you have everything. By the time you compute that cost together, if it was in one tariff structure, you'll be paying, God knows, over 150 naira per kilowatt hour. But today, grid power is about 50-something, 60-something. And everybody's complaining. And yet we can do that if we were privately generating. The difference here is that if Nigerians see power, they will pay. If they don't see, they will complain.
Yeah.
So we must move to a point where we can try and harmonize this whole thing. Everywhere else, power, Ghana, Gambia, Senegal, everywhere, the tariffs are way, way higher than here. But because there is no distortion, the investment's coming. Anytime you have a distortion, no investor will invest because they will just be looking to see when that distortion will go. Today, the government is broke. So they are handing off these subsidies in the sector. The regulator is now forced to activate, let me say, partial activation of the contract-based market. Now, that market is premised on the fact that at least 5,000 megawatts of power will be delivered to discos. The GenCos have already told you, how are we going to do that when we do not control gas supply? Gas is still being delivered to us on a best endeavor basis. How can you contractually hold me to supplying 5,000 megawatts? You're owing me anyway for past power that have generated.
Yes.
So there's to doing the value chain. Much to talk about, but we
Yes.
just really need to
Yes.
get serious.
Some people have said that the problem with this whole power thing is at the beginning, and that when the NEPA was being dismantled and the discos and the gencos were coming into being, that the whole system was wrong ab initio, and this is the problem of Genesis. This is the problem of the battle of the Garden of Eden in Nigerian power industry, and that we cannot solve it until we solve the original sin of not getting the gencos and the discos right at the beginning.
Well, to be honest with you, hindsight, this is 2020 vision. All we can look at is the intention behind the privatization. The idea was that government has no business in business, so we must move and get the private sector in. And if you look at other privatizations that have taken place, banking, telecoms, aviation, there is reason to believe that that is the way to go. And I think we all agree that the more we get government out of business, the better it will be for the whole of us. Now, in the case of the power sector, it's a bit more complicated because, as I said, PHCN, as it was a behemoth. So the plan initially was to privatize the value chain, i.e. generation to transmission to distribution. But then you have a central grid. And the practical issues about privatizing a central grid was big. So there were no takers. It's not as if they didn't go out looking for investors. There were no takers. So whilst they had people who potentially looked at the generation and distribution end, there was nobody to look at for the transmission end. So the agreement was, okay, let's go look for somebody in the private sector who can then manage transmission. This was how they landed with Manitoba Hydro of Canada to help manage TCN at that time. But like me and you know, it was supposed to have been concessioned. It was a disaster. And that disaster meant that government still needed to be there. So you can imagine having government between two privatized entities. I don't need to expand about why that is a total mismatch. So it's not a question. So if you say it was gotten wrong ab initio, if you are querying the intention to privatize, I think we'll all be wrong. But if it is what the government was forced to do, well, that was what it was. But in terms of getting investors into the sectors, the Nigerians who stepped forward, it was a leap of faith on their part. And I will tell you that from the negotiations, it was always understood that the key thing to get right in this sector was a tariff structure. But like me and you know, tariff is so political. Even the government that initiated the privatization exercise, at the point where the exercise was concluded and the regulator was going to trigger off MITO to start a cost-reflective tariff, they requested the regulator to crash prices because elections were coming. That was where, if you say we went wrong, that's where the problem started. And from that point on, everybody was playing catch-up. Then the new government came in, everything was politicized. It was sold to friends, to cronies, to this. Nobody was facing the problem. If the politics, they allowed to be cloud issue. And at that point, we had money, so they get money, voting money for subsidy.